Okay, so let's dive into what's been happening with Disney's Snow White remake. We've looked over a pretty detailed review that has some, well, strong takes on its reception.
Right. Seems like the goal here is to kind of understand the main factors behind how the film's doing and maybe what the bigger picture is.
Exactly, what does it all mean? And the review we looked at, it starts with this interesting little detail.
Oh, yeah.
The reviewer actually went to an early screening, like right there on the Disney lot itself.
Huh. Inside the Magic Kingdom, so to speak.
Sort of, yeah. But what's really striking is the difference between some of the very early buzz and, well, the final verdict we're seeing now.
Always tricky, that initial wave.
Totally. The review mentioned some positive comments right at the start, like Paul Klein from Filmhound magazine apparently called the lead actress a shining supernova.
High praise.
And a Daily Beast article was also leaning positive initially. But, the reviewer points out pretty clearly that those first impressions didn't really hold up.
Doesn't sound like it. It really shows how those first takes, especially now with social media, can sometimes be out of sync with the broader audience feeling later on, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because this reviewer, their take is basically the polar opposite. No mincing words. They call the movie a historic flop.
Wow. Okay.
And maybe the most surprising bit, they actually argue that this flop is, and I quote, a good thing.
A good thing.
Right.
That's bold. There has to be a reason behind that strong stance.
Yeah, the reviewer definitely thinks this sends some kind of message to Hollywood. But interestingly, they do take a moment to sort of acknowledge the crew.
Okay.
Yeah, expressing some sympathy for the people who actually worked on the film, the craftspeople, despite having such a negative view of the final movie.
Right. That adds a bit of perspective. Acknowledging the human element, the labor involved, even if you dislike the product.
Exactly. They feel for the crew, even while disagreeing fundamentally with the film's direction. Okay, so let's get to the brass tacks. The numbers.
The box office always
Yeah.
tells a story.
Well, in its second week, Snow White apparently took a huge dive, like a 66% drop.
Oof. 66%.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really steep fall off for week 2. That usually signals some pretty poor word of mouth, doesn't it?
Seems like it. People weren't telling their friends to go see it, apparently.
That kind of number suggests the initial audience maybe didn't connect or didn't recommend it onward.
And here's something the review highlighted that really caught my eye. In that same second week, domestically,
Yeah.
Snow White was actually beaten by a much smaller film, A Working Man.
Really? A working man?
Yeah, pulled in $15 million from about 3,200 theaters. Snow White, meanwhile, was in way more theaters, like 4,200,
Okay.
and only made $14.2 million.
Wow. So fewer screens, but more money for a working man. That's telling.
What does that disparity suggest to you?
Well, it strongly suggests the audience for a working man was much more motivated, right? Higher per theater average. People were actively seeking it out, maybe. While Snow White, despite being everywhere, just wasn't drawing people in at the same rate. It really emphasizes the connection issue.
Makes sense. So the totals at that point for Snow White were around $66.8 million domestic and $43.19 million globally. Just over $100 million worldwide after 2 weeks.
Okay. $100 million worldwide.
Now, according to the review, Disney isn't throwing in the towel just yet. They're apparently suggesting that, spring breaks are staggered this year.
Ah, the potential for legs.
Right. And less competition coming up, especially for, films aimed at girls and women. They think maybe it could still improve.
Well, it's the optimistic studio line, isn't it? You look
Yeah.
for any potential upside.
Yeah.
But still, recovering from a 66% drop, that's a tough climb.
A very tough climb, especially when you factor in the cost. The reported budget for making and marketing Snow White is apparently $370 million.
370.
Yep.
That's massive. Up there with the biggest blockbusters.
And usually need, 2.5, 3 times the budget just to break even theatrically? Because of the theater cuts, distribution fees.
Exactly. So that $100 million after 2 weeks against a $370 million cost, yeah, it looks pretty grim.
Paints a very difficult picture for profitability, certainly.
The review contrasts this with an alleged $80 million budget for a movie called Captain African American, though the reviewer sounds pretty doubtful about that number being accurate.
Right, budget figures can be murky, but the difference is stark. Location might play a role too,
How so?
Well, the review points out Snow White filmed in London, probably for tax credits, sure, but London is generally a more expensive place to film than, say, Georgia.
Ah, and the review mentions Captain African American was possibly filmed in Georgia, which is known for being more budget-friendly. That makes sense.
Yeah, those location costs add up.
And this all leads to a comparison with another recent Disney release, The Marvels, which also didn't exactly light the world on fire, box office-wise.
Right. Similar budget neighborhood, apparently. And while Snow White might edge out the Marvels domestically in the end, it's lagging way behind worldwide. It needs to make up a huge amount of money just to avoid being a massive loss.
And that brings us to that term, box office bomb, which, simply put, means a film fails to earn back its production, marketing, and distribution costs from its theatrical run.
And with a $370 million price tag, it's got a mountain to climb to avoid that label.
A very, very steep mountain, yes.
Now, the reviewer offers a specific take on why A Working Man did better in that second week.
Okay, what's the theory?
They frame it as a battle between, quote, a normal action movie, A Working Man, and Snow White, which they describe as a girl boss movie with communist propaganda nature.
Wow. Okay, that's certainly a pointed interpretation, very specific framing.
Definitely reflects a particular viewpoint you hear in some online discourse about movies now, about messaging and representation, using terms like normal versus girl boss and communist propaganda. It signals a clear ideological lens.
And it's probably worth noting, the review mentions A Working Man is based on books by Chuck Dixon. The Levon Cade series, he's a known comic book writer, might appeal to a specific audience segment there too.
Right, adds another layer. And the review also talked about how the wider media is reacting.
How are they spinning it or not spinning it?
Well, it says even outlets usually supportive of the big studios are struggling to deny it's a flop. They can see the numbers.
Hard to argue with those figures, I suppose.
But they seem hesitant, according to the reviewer, to pin the blame only on the wokeness factor, that term that keeps popping up.
Which makes sense from an analytical perspective. It's usually more complicated than just one thing, right? Marketing, reviews, competition, the film itself. Lots of potential factors.
And speaking of analysis, the review actually cites a professional box office analyst, David A. Gross.
Ah, okay. What did Gross say?
He apparently suggested that maybe confusing messaging and just plain poor reviews hurt the film, but he also acknowledged that, yes, the woke conversation is definitely part of the picture.
So a more nuanced take. Multiple contributing factors, including the cultural debate around it. That sounds about right. It's rarely just one simple cause.
Yeah, poor reviews, maybe muddled marketing, and the cultural headwinds all playing a part.
Seems likely.
And this whole situation, it has bigger ripples, right? For Hollywood, for theaters.
Definitely.
The review mentions this being an abysmal first quarter overall for the domestic box office. Very few weekends even crossed the $100 million total mark.
Yeah, that's worrying for the industry. Theaters are already under pressure.
For sure. The review even mentions theaters are looking at some creative, maybe desperate measures, like adding bars, pickleball courts, even potentially selling cannabis products in some areas.
Wow. Trying anything to get people in the doors beyond just the movie itself.
Yeah.
Shows how tough the exhibition business is right now.
It does. And the reviewer's advice to Hollywood amidst all this, pretty simple.
Let me guess. Make better movies.
You got it. Just make better movies. Probably resonates with a lot of filmgoers.
Hard to argue with that, fundamentally.
The review glances ahead at other potential big releases this year. Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, the next Avatar. But the tone is a bit cynical, skeptical about whether they'll completely turn things around, especially with Avatar being way out in late December.
Yeah, relying on one or two huge hits at the very end of the year is always risky. And it shows the uncertainty even big IP isn't a guaranteed slam dunk anymore.
There was also some criticism in the review about marketing tactics,
Like what?
pointing out how some of those initial social media reactions can sometimes feel a bit staged or pushed.
The authenticity question. Yeah, audiences are getting savvy about that.
And also questioning the whole definition of an opening weekend with all the Thursday previews starting earlier and earlier. Seems like a call for maybe less spin.
Right, trying to frame the numbers in the best possible light. It's a constant game.
So wrapping it all up, the reviewer's final take on why Snow White failed so badly, they call the whole thing a 2-year-long public relations car accident.
Ouch. That's blunt.
Yeah. And they specifically bring up controversies around the lead actress's comments or social media stuff, basically suggesting the negative buzz built up over time and really hurt the film's image before it even opened.
It really highlights how crucial that public narrative is now. Everything surrounding the film, not just the film itself, impacts perception.
Absolutely. And the reviewer's direct message to Disney, essentially, redo your film again.
Wow. Not just tweak it, but redo it.
Yeah. And the final lesson they think Hollywood should learn, it's not that the audience has changed fundamentally.
Okay.
It's that Hollywood, or parts of it, might have lost touch with what that audience actually wants.
A disconnect between the creators and the consumers, in their view. That's a powerful concluding thought.
So yeah, summing up, Snow White clearly underperformed in a big way. And the reasons discussed range all over the place. Audience reactions, the message, the marketing, maybe broader industry shifts. It's complex.
It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How do studios and filmmakers bridge that potential gap, that disconnect between what's being made and what audiences are actually eager to see, especially now? Gives you something to mull over.
It really does. Thank you for listening.